Hey, it's Sam, and I'm talking today about the Relationships 80/20 class and the overview. This is literally like the sort of overview manual that will be used to teach the course. This is going to be fantastic. And again, the Relationships 80/20 course is where I take the 20% of the most important factors and really go down deeply into those things, because 20% of the work gives you 80% of the results. And so again, this is to really help people concentrate most deeply on the most important things that you're going to be able to share with someone when they're trying to understand their relationships and their relationship with another person. Of course, that also includes you, so that you can understand these things as well. And they're really pulled from many sources, Vedic sources that aren't even astrological, and these principles that actually come from things like Sankhya philosophy, which is the same principles of yoga and Ayurveda, etc. Masculine, feminine, the interaction and the dance of the masculine, feminine, as shown by the sun and the moon, the yin, the yang, even the seasons, all of those polarities, and then how those things filter down into specific practices astrologically. And I'm going to apply those to the approach to astrology that I've been doing for more than a decade now, called 3D astrology, 3D relationship astrology. And of course, 3D means three-dimensional, but it's also like a three-pronged approach to astrology, to relationship astrology, where first you need to evaluate the individual. That's the most important part, and their capacities. Then you take their capacities and their nature, and you place it with another person and their capacities and their nature. That's called synastry, where you lay two charts next to each other. And then I also compare the two charts based on the classical Vedic Kuta system. And again, that's a different lens to look through. And again, this is also, clarifying all of these ideas is also going to be very important, because sometimes, again, we get into these false choices when we don't really know what we're doing, frankly. Most of the confusion that people have when they're trying to do relationship astrology at a high level, or really any kind of astrology at a high level, is they get in these sort of conundrums. Well, what if you see this thing here and that thing there? Then what? Now I'm confused. For example, what if the synastry is good, but the kutas are bad? Or the this is that and this is that? Then what? Again, this is a choice that is born out of ignorance. I don't mean to say that, I don't mean to be rude about it, but I mean ignorance, meaning ignorance of how to actually apply the teachings and how to do the practice. Because the truth of the matter is, nothing ever really contradicts anything else. Everything is different from everything else. You could see, like, for example, what if Venus looks good, but the seventh lord looks bad? Then what? Which one do you listen to? Which is more important? And then we get into these boxes where, instead of learning how to interpret it, we get into these false choices. And by the way, astrologers will tell you this. They'll go, well, pay more attention to Venus because blah, blah, or pay more attention to that. You pay attention to both, but they're not the same thing, right? So again, this is why when we drill down into the most important principles, we also illuminate all of these things. We get rid of all these false choices. We stop getting into boxes. So we can see how synastry and what's shown through synastry is totally different than what's shown through the kutas. What's shown through Venus is totally different than what's shown through the seventh house ruler. What's shown through, the moon in the kuta system is different than what's shown through the moon in synastry. And the moon as a general principle working in someone's individual chart. So that's what we're going to break down. Conceptually, we're just going to be concentrating on all of this 20% of the stuff that does 80% of the work, but we're going to break it down systematically so you also clarify the entire practice, because this is also the opportunity to do that. Because then, of course, I'm going to be explaining all of these distinctions in addition to all of the most important points. So I do have here on this page some of the most important points. 16 major points will be covered, approximately 30 minutes each. So it breaks out into about 16 different points of interest. It's about 8 hours of teaching. And by the way, it's for only $47. I usually charge, like, this would normally be like $147, but I'm drastically discounting it because people, maybe are in the social distancing and whatnot, and so they have some time to learn. Again, it's drastically discounted here. 8 hours, only $47. In fact, it's even more than that because then there's a follow-up weekend where you get to ask all of your questions. I want you also to understand, even about the 8 hours, it's 2 4-hour days. But even that 8 hours, this is 8 hours of me just teaching uninterrupted. So it's not even a class where, okay, folks, now anybody got any questions? And I kind of kick back a little bit and people kind of talk and it sort of wanders. No, this is 8 hours of focused teaching. Probably winds up being about 10 hours of regular class time because you've been to classes. You go and then the teacher talks and then people start asking questions and it gets a little distracting and it's like, I want the teacher to get back on track. This is just me on track the whole time in the teaching. But then what happens is the following week, and there's a follow-up class where you just get to ask questions and interact with me personally about any questions that you might have. So it really winds up being literally about 10 hours. But in the teaching weekend, it's about 8 hours. And so, again, the 16 major points that are covered, first of all, is the 80-20 of masculine and feminine in general. One of the main things we first need to understand is this concept of masculine and feminine interacting. That's really what we're seeing in relationship astrology and in relationships in general and in all relationships. It's a flow of masculine and feminine, even with two women as friends, even with two men as friends, even with you and everybody else there's a flow of masculine and feminine happening. One is maybe more dominant most of the time, others more in the receptive role. Astrology shows all of it, by the way, right? And so, in general, though, we need to understand the concepts of masculine and feminine. But again, I'm not going to talk about every single thing you need to know. I'm going to take like the 20% that's the most important, the most concentrated. And I have here, it says sensitive man and strong woman. This is a kind of a sort of monolith that I talked about several years ago when I actually wrote a book on this called Stellar Relationships that I've been back and forth with it about publishing and whatnot. But sensitive man and strong woman is a very interesting way to illustrate our gender confusion. So I'm going to bring them out again. Sensitive man and strong woman. We get to have a little laugh at them. It's the sensitive man and the strong woman and how they're kind of confusing archetypes. But many of the times when we get in relationships, think about it right now, it's sensitive man trying to deal with strong woman. I'm a strong woman, again, and it's fine women are strong, and it's fine men are sensitive. But, for example, a man needs to come to his sensitivity, which is more of that feminine quality, through strength, through his masculine. The woman needs to be the strong woman through her sensitivity first. So I'm going to talk about sensitive man and strong woman here. And again, many of my students, even that have been studying me for a long time, have never heard me talk about this. It's actually quite funny when sensitive man and strong woman get into a relationship. Most of our relationship problems come because sensitive man and strong woman are trying to communicate, right? So it's actually a very fun, enjoyable way to talk about how relationships get upside down. So I'm going to talk about those relationship principles, those masculine and feminine principles in a very powerful way, and then illustrate it with sensitive man and strong woman, which is always a lot of fun. Then we get into the 80-20 of masculine and feminine in astrology, right? Now, how do we see this kind of interaction in astrology? And we're going to really break out, more than anything, this Venus and Mars as relationship factors in Vedic astrology. Venus and Mars, how they're really interacting, and then the Sun and Moon as relationship factors in astrology, and how the Venus-Mars connection sort of feeds into the Sun-Moon stereotype and archetype as well. And you notice I have Venus-Mars first because in relationships, especially romantic relationships, we're actually coming at them from a Venus-Mars place first. And it's trying to become the Sun-Moon. And again, we're going to talk about those things in general and how to really understand how Venus and Mars are interacting through things like sexuality, frustration and anger, dealing with these two things and how men and women sort of teach each other these different lessons and then how ultimately we're trying to be the king and the queen. Mars is more like the sort of knight, or the, yeah, he's kind of like the soldier defending the king, but the sun is the king. Venus is like the maiden or the ladies in waiting who are in service of the moon, which is the queen. So understanding these archetypes are very important astrologically, because they also match up with each other. Like the natural match with Venus is Mars. The natural match with the sun is the moon, right? They're natural. But sometimes you get this kind of shadow connection of Mars with the moon or sun with Venus. Again, there can be a lot of glue there, but it can be a little bit, it's not the appropriate matching. And so again, understanding these archetypes first as the sort of generators of masculine and feminine in astrology are very important. By the way, I'm also going to be talking about all the other principles in general as well. Like in this section, I'm also going to talk about all the planets. I'm going to cover them all as contributing factors in relationship astrology. Like, for example, Mercury is our communication. Jupiter is what gives us hope. That's why it's related to children. You have children, it brings a partnership and a couple together because now they have a common goal, a common purpose. How many relationships stay together for the kids? Where do you think the kids come from? Jupiter. Jupiter's kids. It gives us a direction. How many relationships break up after the kids don't need us anymore to guide them? Then the couple has to come back on their potentiality. So again, we'll talk about these things. Mercury, again, is the capacity to speak, communicate, to laugh at yourself, to have fun. This is very important. Saturn is the commitments, the hard work that we're willing to do together. The nodes create all kinds of sort of triggering and, things that are often hard to understand, but a very powerful glue. So we're going to talk about all of the factors as well. But we're going to, again, it's 80-20. We're going to spend 80% of the time, or I'm sorry, it's also 80% of the time on the 20% of the most important factors, right? And those 20% give you 80% of the results. So you can see the 80-20 there as well. We're going to spend even 80% of the time on 20% of the factors, because those 20% of the factors give you 80% of the result. So then we get into 80-20 of 3D relationship specifically. And again, this is where you really, 3D relationship astrology specifically. This is where, again, many of my students who've already studied relationship astrology with me, they've learned the systems and all of the planets, all the matching, all of the synastry, all of those ways of evaluating gender. But again, and all of the factors. But again, even when I consult with my advanced students, I see where they can get bogged down in too much of the complexity. Right, so when I evaluate their chart, I can see this, and they're trying to bring too much together. There's 20% that give you 80% of the result. We need to just double, triple, quadruple back on that. In many ways, these classes, which seem like beginning classes, are more valuable to the people that have been studying with me longer, because they need to be reminded of the highest leverage principles. It's very easy to forget. We get in our own routine as well. We have our own biases. And again, when we get into the 80-20 of 3D relationship astrology, I'm just going to drill down and show you how to unravel the most important qualities. And by the way, of course, we're going to have a lot of charts. I'll be looking at a lot of charts. It's not all theory. People that study with me know that, especially in this kind of class, it's a lot of, we're literally looking at charts. We're looking at two charts next to each other. I'm showing you masculine and feminine. I'm showing you kutas and all that stuff. But 80-20 of personal chart reading, again, assessing the masculine and feminine for individuals. Of course, this includes these things I just talked about, Venus and Mars, Sun and Moon, for each individual. This includes their gender integrity as well as their relationship to their opposite gender. It's very important when you're looking at a man's chart. First, you definitely have to drill down into his masculine integrity. This includes things like all of the sign factors. Again, what determines gender? We have two gender planets on each side, two masculine, two feminine. Actually, there's three masculine, but it's mainly the two masculine and two feminine that I just mentioned. But then also the relationship of, let's say, the man to his feminine side, or the woman to her masculine side. What's the ratio? What's the kind of partner they're going to get based on their ratio of masculine feminine. You've got to understand this. It's so crucial. This is to get in their head, because again, a man who's feminine, for example, is much more developed or prominent than his masculine. He's often or almost always going to get into a relationship with women whose masculine is much stronger than their feminine, because he's already much more feminine. So the more masculine woman is going to be pulling at him, because his masculine, which is to go out and get it and deal with that, is not as confident. So looking at this and understanding the psychology behind this, and knowing that this is where this person is coming from, regardless of the synastry with the other person. This is their nature and their relationship to their masculine feminine. Women who have much stronger much stronger masculine, right? Or like a Leo, or they got the sun in the first, or, you'll see they're very confident in their career and all this kind of stuff. But then in relationships, they're doing the same thing, and it doesn't feel as good. Yeah, it's great, it works in the career. It doesn't work when you're in the relationship. Because in the relationship, they're trying to bond to their feminine side. Okay? So again, and they're going to wind up usually with men who are like the man I just talked about, who are looking to be kind of in the receptive role. I don't want to say dominated in that regard, but who are looking to be led, when instead the woman wants to trust and open and connect to her heart in relationship, not the masculine side. So again, how to assess these things and really drill down. And we also evaluate Venus, right? As the main planet of relationship. I should have put the moon here as well. Also, the moon should be there. So this will be updated. Venus and the moon. Again, the moon is the mind and consciousness, and Venus, of course, is the active expression of our attraction and whatnot. And so again, you have to evaluate. This comes down, or this reveals a lot of the inherent capacity of the couple, or of the individual, to enjoy compromising in the exchange with another individual, with Venus and the moon. But again, they're different. They're different things. Venus is compromising in a way that's very different than the moon. And again, it's not monolithic here. We wind up in these situations where, again, well, what do you do if the woman has a strong both? Again, these are the comments I get. What if both masculine and feminine are there? Then you interpret it. You're just interpreting it. You're not judging it. It's not a judging contest. Well, hers is good, so it's good. No, you're looking at the ratio. You're looking at what the person is grappling with. Many people have a pretty even mix of both. When they do that, again, this is just what you explain. This is just what you know about the person. You're not looking to judge the person. You're looking to understand the person. First, you have to understand each person before you can start illuminating what they're doing with each other. So again, this individual evaluation focuses mostly in relationship sense around the genders, the relationship to their gender, to the opposite gender, that sort of ratio, and the complexity. Again, because we have Sun, Mars, Moon, Venus, but again, well, what do you do when Mars is strong and the Sun is weak? Then what? Well, they're different things. Again, not to belabor the point, but these are the things that hang people up. Because what they're really saying is, what do you say if one is good and one is bad? Which is it, good or bad? That's literally the same question I get asked constantly, is what if that one is good and one is bad? Which one is it? The answer is always neither, because there is no good or bad. You're just interpreting what is there, right? The Mars is this part. The moon is this part. Venus is this part of the feminine. Sun is this part of the masculine. Knowing how to evaluate that is very important. And then, as I said, Venus and the moon factors as well. And then the seventh house and the seventh house ruler and those specific relationship factors in each chart. Again, these are the most important things to evaluate it as it pertains to gender and the relationship. So again, Venus is the karaka of relationships, but then each chart has a different seventh house ruler. If we're talking about, Capricorn, then the moon is the seventh house ruler. If we're talking about Leo, Saturn is the 7th house ruler. So again, all the relationship factors. There might be a planet in the 7th house as well. Conditioning. Again, the same question. Well, what if the 7th house ruler is strong, but then there's a difficult planet there in the 7th house? They're different things. It's not monolithic. They're different things, okay? This is what we learn. So then we get into the 80-20 of the synastry in 3D relationships. Now we take what we just learned about each individual and we put these two crazy people together. We're like, oh my God, what have you done? Moons and masculine-feminine flow. By the way, I want to say something as I'm going along that I didn't put on here that I should have. Is the entire time, one of the main things that I'm going to be making sure people understand is also how to counsel people while you're explaining. It's not just identifying, but it's how to counsel the person about this, what to say. And how, especially in this first part up here, before we get into the literal back and forth, it's how do we, once we understand these things in greater detail, then first of all, we can explain them better. The biggest problem with people not being able to explain the complicated karma that we have with relationships is we don't understand it ourselves very well. We don't know what we're doing in them. So when someone comes to you and they want this relationship and they want you to tell them how to get it, and you have to be more detached and just reading it this way. And as you explain these things to them and these parts and qualities of first what relationships, what you're really learning in them, what's really unfolding, and how their nature is being played out, you're diffusing their drama on some level. Now they're still going to want what they want, but by the time you get to all of the stuff that they were so charged up about, it naturally starts to diffuse because they're seeing, you're right. I have these tendencies and I'm getting all fired up about this, and it's because my feminine is this, and you're right, it's this. All of a sudden, you've given a lot of space. So the interpretations become much easier the more you understand what you're doing and what you're talking about, what masculine and feminine is anyway, how it interacts in a positive and negative way and dysfunctional way, how their individual chart is showing this first, before they get involved with anybody. That's just their nature. And again, you make these things clear. So I just want to be intentional here to say that throughout the whole weekend, I'm telling you the entire time how to explain these things to people. Because this is some of the hardest stuff that astrologers deal with. They often say, well, I understand it myself, but what do you say to the person? How do you explain to them that their marriage is, quote, bad, and they want to stay in it, but it's bad, or it's this, or it's that? First of all, again, I'm going to explain these things, but you don't get into those problems. It's not your karma, it's their karma. And again, one of the main things you do, it's not like you're not involved, but you remind them these are your choices. This is where you are. And also here is where things are going in the future. And you're not responsible, first of all, for making it right. And again, it's nothing wrong with counseling them on how to make things better, which I'm also going to do. I'm going to tell you things throughout the weekend that you can say, suggestions that you can make when you see things that are mixed up. You can make suggestions and they'll appreciate them and they'll be correct. But you don't have to worry, and again, the better you explain these things, the less you get into these problems of where at the end of the reading they're just burdening you to fix it for them or have them decide whether they should break up or not break up. I'm going to tell you how to handle these things. I'm going to explain to you how to approach this subtle kind of dance. Because again, in relationships, we're giving people a lot of, on some level, kind of, I don't want to say bad news because that makes it sound bad. It's not really bad news. It's welcome news when they hear it. But if you're not careful, it can be bad news. You're basically having to tell them that, look, this is the main thing that we're doing here is teaching you about your relationship nature. Because one of the biggest shifts people have to make is that it's not the other person so much. The other person is part of it, but they're part of your life and your world. And so much of the reading is explaining to people about their nature and opening up space and compassion for the other person as well. And much of what you have to do at times is get people out of their triggering, get people out of their, well, what if they're a psychopath, or what if they're a narcissist, or what if they're this? How do you deal with that? Again, I'm going to teach people how to explain these things so that you get out of all of that intense projection that the other person has. It's easy when you know how to explain it, but you can't really explain it very well if you don't understand it. But I just wanted to be intentional to say that throughout the weekend, I'm going to be saying, here's how you explain this to the person. And here's what you can recommend, okay? So, 80-20 synastry, moon and the masculine-feminine flow. Very important, the moons and the masculine-feminine flow, whose moon is ahead, whose moon is not. And the whole masculine-feminine structure of the chart in general. Who's initiating, not just with the moons, but with the whole chart in general and with those principles. And again, like I said, genders in general through planets and signs. This is the synastry. When you place one chart on top of another, which means that, and it's through rashis, of course, it's through signs. By the way, this is another reason that you should always use a South Indian chart. When you use a North Indian chart, it's houses on top of each other, but that's utterly irrelevant. You need signs. It's rashis, it's the zodiac. One person's Saturn on the other person's Mars means Saturn was in Libra and the other person's Mars was in Libra. Okay, so it's totally South Indian chart because it's two portraits of the zodiac. And then the other important ones are the synastry points and the connections to Venus and the 7th house ruler. So again, anything affecting Venus through synastry. One person's Mars on the other person's Venus. And which one? It's different. If it's the man's Mars on woman's Venus, it's different than woman's Mars on man's Venus. Again, Saturn on Mars, Saturn on Venus, whatever. The important connections to Venus and the 7th house and 7th lord through synastry, because of course that's relationships. Synastry connections to the lugna and the lugna lord, again, because this is the person. Your ascendant is Taurus and someone has Jupiter in Taurus in their birth chart. Well, right away, that's a boom. That's they're bringing that into your life. When you get around the person, that's what changes your life. Okay? Again, because the lugna is not the moon. You wouldn't say that's how you feel. Feel around the person is the planet on the moon, if there is one. Jupiter, it's kind of how you feel, but it's more of how you live. The lugna is really how you're living, not necessarily how you're feeling. And again, you need to see the difference between the lugna and the moon. Lugna is what you're doing and how you're living your life. Moon is how you feel about how you're living your life, right? So again, any kind of synastry to the lugna and lugna lord, and then any kind of malefic synastry, especially, again, and I'm going to go through a hierarchy, but like one person's Saturn on the other one's Ketu or something, you know, like, because these are now two difficult planets through synastry. But you might also get like, you know, one person's Ketu on the other person's Venus. Okay, that's still, one is benefic, one is malefic. So we're going to talk about the scenarios, but really you want to notice and pay a lot of attention to when malefic things come together, and particularly when someone already has, let's say, two malefics joined in a house, like someone has Saturn, Mars, let's say somewhere, and the other person's, you know, Ketu is there, or any planet is there, but particularly if it's another malefic from the other person. Things like that you want to really look at. And again, we're going to talk about how to interpret it and how to counsel people on it and how to read it properly. And then we have the 80-20 of the Kuta matching. The Kutas are based on the nakshatras, nakshatra matching, and there are many different factors of nakshatras. And there's 8 to 10 Kutas. There's Ashtakuta, which is 8, and there's Dashakuta, which is 10 Kuta factors. We're going to look at the most important ones. Veda and Raju are blemishes that start within the Kuta system. They're blemishes based on nakshatras and body parts and things like that. Then the Nadi Kuta is very important. It usually gives 8 points, and it's related to the element. Shows how important it is to not have the same element, not be in the same element, to have a different elemental composition, which again, elements are also related to gender often, but you want to have a different element. There are, of the three elements, water, windy, and fiery. Okay, and they should be different. And again, how to explain those things? The Rashi Kuta, which is also called the Sri Dirg, which is the distance from the man to the woman, it's also reinforced up here with moon and masculine feminine flow. You see the same principle affirmed in the Rashi Kuta and the Sri Dirg, but you can break it out a little bit more there. Bhava Kuta, which has to do with the interests of the people, interest because it's based on bhavas, and signs, which means signs that are 311, 17, or squares, show good, show beneficial interests. And then also the Ganakuta, which shows different qualities of temperament. Gana is like the temperament. There's a Manusha, or there's a Rakshasa, which is demon or intense temperament. There's a Manusha, which is a human temperament. And then there's a Deva, which is a divine or angelic temperament. And so there are different ways to qualify that. But these are very important, again, to be able to interpret. Then there's also the overall score. I'll put that in there as well. Again, I'm going to make sure to cover everything in a certain measure. But I'm going to focus and prioritize on the 20% to give 80% of the results. So you'll also hear me mention all of the other things in context. I'm not going to not mention them. But you'll see why this 80-20 is in the context that it's in. For example, things that I haven't mentioned, even in the personal chart of the 80-20. There are many things that contribute to masculine, feminine, or the person's nature, even nature in relationships that I could say. For example, aspects to certain planets here or there, or different ways that, other non-compatibility factors might somewhat influence their masculine, feminine, or what have you. Again, I'm going to mention them, but I'm not going to concentrate on them as much because I want you to see the ratio of priority. Same way with synastry. Synastry is a huge thing. There are aspects through synastry as well. There are qualities of synastry that don't really influence relationships as much, and I'm going to put those things in context for you. Again, this has come after years of watching students and how they're evaluating and doing relationship astrology readings, and they're not giving the proper priority at times and the proper value, right? They might be putting the fact that, Venus, no, I'm sorry, not Venus, but like Saturn in one person's chart is in synastry to the other person's Jupiter, but in like their third house for one and the sixth house for the other or something. Again, where it's there, but it's like, okay, but you're missing the fact that, like, his Mars is in her ascendant. Like, you have to concentrate more on this, not just any point of synastry or any sort of factor. So all of it's there, but it's not equally as important. You can go to the doctor because you have a little, like you like broke your arm or something, and they're working on that. And that's important at the moment, and then you fall down and start having a seizure. All of a sudden, they're not going to pay attention to the broken arm. Everything is not as important as everything else, or at any given time. I'm also going to make sure to dedicate some time to things like dashas and what karmas are awakening. It's very organic once you start doing readings, because you'll see the dasha of the thing that's producing the reading and where they are in that subtext of their life. So again, these classes wind up going in many directions. So trust me, this outline is something that keeps me reasonably focused. But then it goes into all different directions where you start to see it come to life. So again, I encourage you to get this Relationships 80-20 fast track to doing Vedic relationship astrology. I'm sure you'll really like it. It's only $47, a great discount. Again, it's Saturday and Sunday on the June, I guess it's 13th and 14th, is it? And then, again, if you're seeing this afterward, if you're seeing this after that, it's, then these are recordings, because, people watch these recordings after the class was live. If you're attending it live, you're also getting a Q&A. And by the way, if you're getting it after it was done live, the Q&A call is also included. So again, great value. You're going to really learn a lot, whether you're a beginner and you don't understand these things at all, or you're very advanced. You're going to see it from soup to nuts, they say. From how do we understand masculine and feminine through the Vedic lens, through the Indian way of seeing the world. Again, it's the same principles that permeate yoga and meditation and even like Buddhism and Tantra and Kama Sutra and all of that lovely, elegant, masculine, feminine, and Indian culture, and in ancient cultures. All ancient cultures revered the masculine and the feminine together. What is that? How does that show up in astrology? How does that then show up in an actual chart of an individual? How does that individual get involved with another individual and you put that together? Then how do you look at the more subtle spiritual connections through the nakshatra Kuta matching? So I look forward to having you in the class, and you take care. Go ahead and register.